Hello, this is Mark Grier, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the May 14th issue of the New York Times on the Now Your Frontier radio reading service. Okay, let's get started. First article: Why Xi doesn't need a deal with Trump. China's president is buying time for Beijing and may see an opening for a U.S. president weakened by the war in Iran. When China's president met President Trump last year, the Chinese leader wielded his country's control over critical minerals, a strong posture that helped nudge Mr. Trump to agree to a year-long trade truce. This week, when Mr. Xi hosts the American president in Beijing, he will have another powerful card to play: the war in Iran. While the United States has been at war, Mr. Xi has been calling for peace and receiving foreign dignitaries from the Gulf and Europe seeking his help to end the crisis. Just before the U.S. president's visit, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, traveled to Beijing in a not-so-subtle reminder of China's sway over its partner in the Middle East. The Iran issue actually helps China, said Li Daoke, a prominent economist at the University of Beijing. China, he said, has important economic leverage over Tehran that it could be willing to use in pursuit of goals it cares more about, chief among them prying the United States away from Taiwan, the self-governing island Beijing claims is its own. That should give Mr. Xi extra confidence going into the summit that starts Thursday, the leaders' first in-person meeting since October. The White House has been trying to pressure China, a key buyer of sanctioned Iranian oil, to cut back on its support of Tehran. China's useful influence over Iran. China has its own reasons to help end the conflict. Its economy is affected by higher energy prices. A global recession would hurt China's exports, which are a major engine of growth. Its strategic oil reserves, while helpful, are not limitless. China has prodded Iranian officials to negotiate with the United States, but is wary of becoming entangled in a war it sees as largely Washington's to resolve. Even if it won't get involved militarily, though, China may be willing to work with the United States on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a key sea route through which as much as 40% of China's oil imports are shipped. The Chinese side may reach some agreement with the United States, saying, "Let's work together to persuade Iran to keep the strait open," Dr. Li said, adding that Beijing would also likely want assurances that the United States would not block the waterway. China could still offer various incentives to Tehran to work with Washington, such as loans, investments, and offers to help with post-war reconstruction, analysts say. Beijing is unlikely to press Tehran to give up its nuclear program, though. Discussing Taiwan arms sales no longer taboo? Well, what Mr. Xi wants most from Mr. Trump lies elsewhere, in Taiwan. Mr. Xi is seeking softening of America's support for the island, whether through a delay or reduction in arms sales, or a statement that Washington opposes its independence. The Trump administration has already delayed announcing a $13 billion package of arms sales to Taiwan to avoid angering Mr. Xi. President Trump this week said again that he planned to discuss with China the question of arms sales to Taiwan. If he were to do so, Mr. Trump could be violating a long-standing commitment known as the Six Assurances. a pillar of the U.S. Taiwan and U.S. China policies. The Reagan era assurances were sent to Taiwan's president in 1982, and one is generally understood to say that the U.S. government would not consult with Beijing before an arms sale to Taiwan. For Mr. Trump to put this on the table could be a departure from decades of American foreign policy, depending on how the topic was broached, and a win for Mr. Xi. Among more hawkish Chinese scholars, the war in Iran has also exposed U.S. military weakness, giving Beijing yet more confidence to push on the issue of Taiwan. During the conflict, the United States was forced to divert military assets away from Asia and deplete its munitions stockpiles. The conflict with Iran indicates that the U.S. simply cannot sustain a major war with China over Taiwan. That's very clear, said a leading American studies scholar at Fudan University in Shanghai. Redefining the relationship. For Beijing, the summit is perhaps less about extracting any specific concessions and more about redefining the terms of how the two superpowers should engage. Mr. Xi will be seeking validation that his country, the world's second largest economy, is now an equal to the United States, and that he, as its leader, is a peer of Mr. Trump's. It is something Mr. Xi has sought since he first took office in 2012, and an understanding that Chinese officials and analysts say would herald a more stable relationship of managed, however uneasy, coexistence. If the U.S. president is the leader of the free world and the Chinese leader is his peer, then what does that say about the Chinese leader, his leadership? That means that he must be a world leader as well, said Yoon Soon, director of the China program at the Stimson Center in Washington. China has argued most recently in an editorial by the official Chinese news agency on Wednesday, headlining "Finding the Right Way for China and the U.S. to Get Along as Major Powers," that the United States should not expect to have it both ways with China. It criticized Washington for asking Beijing to help on issues it cares about, such as helping to curb the flow of fentanyl to America, while simultaneously hurting Chinese interests, for instance, by imposing sanctions on Chinese companies. But that dynamic has defined the relationship for the past 8 years, leading them to spar over everything from origins of the COVID-19 pandemic to the appearance of a Chinese spy balloon floating over the United States. Today, the two sides remain at odds over China's support of Iran and Russia, as well as U.S. export controls that cut Chinese companies off from advanced computer chips and other technology. China wants to buy time to get stronger. Ultimately, China wants more stability and a continuation of the trade truce. That means no more tariffs, no export controls, no sanctions imposed on its companies. They just want time and space to fortify themselves for future competition, said Amanda Horatio, a director at the Chinese group's China practice, who was recently in Beijing meeting scholars and officials. Beijing has already been doing that by building up what Mr. Xi calls national self-reliance, a technology, but also trade and science. Since the two leaders last met 6 months ago, China has sharpened its tools to inflict economic pain on rivals. After years of U.S. export controls, Chinese companies are building their own chips, while firms like DeepSeek are designing AI systems that get around the constraints. Beijing has also demonstrated that it will push back if provoked. When Washington placed sanctions on a Chinese refinery in April for buying Iranian oil, China ordered its companies not to comply. To help set a positive tone, though, China may commit to purchases of Boeing aircraft, American soybeans, and U.S. beef. For the Chinese, that's an okay price to pay for stability. Okay, next article. Oil prices waver as Trump meets China's Xi. Oil prices oscillated on Thursday as investors weighed fears that the energy shock from the U.S.-Iran war will push up inflation around the world. But stocks rose on continued optimism over artificial intelligence. Markets were keen for any updates from the meeting between President Trump and the Chinese leader. The summit was full of pleasantries, with Mr. Trump praising Mr. Xi, who delivered a stark warning on Taiwan, saying relations between Beijing and Washington could enter an extremely dangerous place if Mr. Trump ignored China's demands. The war in Iran has cast a shadow of uncertainty on the summit. Mr. Trump is expected to press Mr. Xi to persuade Iran to end the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the critical waterway that has been effectively blocked since the war started. Oil prices edge higher. The price of Brent crude, the global market benchmark for oil, wobbled in choppy trading on Thursday and is about 45% higher than before the war started. West Texas Intermediate crude, the U.S. benchmark, hovered around $100 a barrel. Stocks climb on AI boom. Futures trading in the S&P 500 ticked higher, suggesting a modest increase when stock markets open later in the day. The S&P 500 has hit record highs as investors have rallied around stocks of tech companies spending more on artificial intelligence. In Europe, stocks inched higher. The Stoxx 600, a broad European index, rose slightly, and the DAX in Germany climbed 1%. In Britain, where the economy grew 0.6% in the first 3 months of the year, the FTSE 100 was flat. Stocks in Asia were mixed. In South Korea, the benchmark Kospi index jumped nearly 2%, pulled up by chip makers, but the Nikkei 225 in Japan fell 1%. Gas prices rise again. Gas prices rose 2 cents on Thursday to a national average of $4.53 for a gallon of regular, according to the AAA Motor Club. The jump in gas prices has driven up costs at the pump 52% for Americans since the conflict began. Gas prices don't move in lockstep with changes in crude oil prices, usually trailing increases or drops by a few days. The average price of diesel fuel were flat at $5.67 a gallon on Thursday, still up 51% since the war started. What they are saying, inflation pressures are building. The momentum in the tech rally and hope for a positive outcome from the Trump and Xi summit are bolstering investors. Bob Savage, the head of market macro strategy at BNY, wrote in a research note. But price pressures are emerging as a dominant concern. Underlying inflation pressures are building globally, raising the risk of tighter financial conditions. Okay, next article. One more article on the China visit. Elon Musk returns to Trump's side in Beijing. Mr. Musk is part of a delegation of business leaders to China, where his interests include Tesla's electric vehicle factory and solar plants. Nearly a year after his pugnacious exit from the White House, Elon Musk joined President Trump in Beijing on Thursday as an ambassador for American business in China. Mr. Trump's tariffs have complicated Mr. Musk's business interests in China, though the two had previously fallen out. Mr. Musk stood alongside cabinet officials at the Great Hall of the People on Thursday when Mr. Trump shook hands with China's leader. Few American business leaders have a more tangled relationship with China. While China has long been a key manufacturing base for his solar, battery, and electric car businesses, Mr. Musk now faces increasingly stiff competition there. U.S. officials have said that Mr. Trump wanted to discuss creating a board of investment and a board of trade with China. As the two leaders met, Mr. Musk was joined by Tim Cook, the outgoing chief executive of Apple, and Jensen Huang, the chief executive of American chipmaker NVIDIA. Many good things have been achieved, Mr. Musk said on Thursday. Mr. Musk brought his son to the Chinese capital. The 6-year-old has often visited the Oval Office with his father. China is the most important market outside the United States for Tesla, Mr. Musk's electric car company. It is also home to the factory where Tesla produces half of all its cars, mostly for export to other parts of the world. But in China, Tesla has been losing ground to local rivals. BYD has surpassed Tesla as the world's largest electric car maker. Chinese drivers now have many other electric vehicle options at far lower prices, and Mr. Musk's role as an advisor to Mr. Trump has added the mounting negative consumer sentiment. Mr. Musk's other global ventures also face intensifying competition from Chinese companies, which have the financial backing of China's state-owned banks. For decades, the Chinese government has heavily subsidized the development of a homegrown green energy industry, while shielding some sectors, including wind turbines and electric car batteries, from foreign competition. Now, Chinese companies produce the most efficient and affordable renewable energy and grid storage technologies, like solar panels and large batteries for data centers. Contemporary Amperex technology and CATL has become the world's largest maker of electric vehicle batteries. It also supplies them to Tesla. Mr. Musk's deep ties to China have extended to the reputation of Starlink, the satellite internet service operated by his rocket company, SpaceX. When officials in Taiwan, which China claims is part of its territory, sought to make the island's communications network more resilient to national disasters or military conflicts, they chose not to work with SpaceX. The Chinese government has also imposed limits on Mr. Musk and his companies. Tesla cars are barred from some sensitive sites, including military bases. Beijing has also delayed approval for Tesla's autonomous driving technology, even as Chinese automakers have been allowed to deploy theirs. Tesla's executives said on a recent earnings call that they expect approval later this year. Differences over domestic policy led Mr. Musk to leave the administration's government overhaul effort last May. He had spent almost $300 million to help elect Mr. Trump in 2024. The rift peaked in June with a public falling out, carried out largely on their competing social media platforms. Mr. Musk implied that the president was connected to the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, the sex offender, while Mr. Trump threatened to cancel the government subsidies and contracts held by Mr. Musk's companies. By contrast, Mr. Musk has avoided criticizing Beijing, instead praising China on X as the world leader in electric vehicles and solar power. You are listening to a reading of articles and features of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. South Carolina governor plans special session to redraw House maps. Governor Henry McMaster, a Republican, appears prepared to thrust the state into the nation's redistricting wars. Governor Henry McMaster of South Carolina, a Republican, plans to call the state legislature back for a special session that will be focused on redrawing the state's congressional maps, lawmakers said on Wednesday evening. The effort could eliminate the state's sole Democratic district, held by Representative James Clyburn. Mr. McMaster's decision came one day after 5 Republican state senators voted with Democrats to block a resolution that would have brought the legislature back to the state capitol to consider redistricting. That vote had seemed to close the door on the matter. Republican lawmakers had considered an agreement to extend their session only when it became clear that Mr. McMaster would not immediately call a special session himself. But Mr. McMaster, who cannot seek re-election because of term limits, now appears willing to thrust South Carolina into the redistricting battles that have reached fever intensity, particularly in the South, ever since the Supreme Court dealt a blow to the Voting Rights Act last month. President Trump has been clear about his wish for a GOP sweep of all 7 of South Carolina's congressional districts, pressing Republican officials to draw new district maps before the midterm elections. Mr. McMaster's office declined to comment on Wednesday. Recently, he had said that he would let the Republican-controlled General Assembly decide the matter. If Mr. McMaster calls the special session, lawmakers would face a time crunch. South Carolina's primaries are on June 9th, but early voting begins in 2 weeks. So Republicans would have to pass new maps before May 26th. The South Carolina House has proposed moving the congressional primaries to August to accommodate new maps. There are also legal hurdles to consider. Hundreds of overseas voters have already cast ballots, which could prompt lawsuits if their votes are discarded to account for a change of date in congressional elections. It is still unclear if new maps would pass in a special session, although Republicans control the legislature and would need only a simple majority to approve them. Davey Hyatt, the Republican leader of the South Carolina House, told reporters that his chamber was ready to get things rolling on Friday morning and vote on a map as quickly as possible, ideally next week. Shane Massey, the Republican leader of the state Senate, who drew national attention for his impassionate speech against redistricting, was much more apprehensive about moving fast. He said public input was important and continued to voice opposition to the redistricting effort. I haven't heard anything that alleviates the concerns, not just for me, but for other people that I've been talking to, Mr. Massey said. The concerns are there. If anything, they're only heightened. He also noted that there were other pressing matters for the legislature to consider in the special session, such as finishing the budget. Unlike their counterparts in states like Tennessee, Alabama, and Louisiana, some South Carolina Republicans have been much more lukewarm about the idea of mid-decade redistricting, mostly because they are skeptical that a new map would guarantee one more Republican-leaning congressional district. Instead, they fear that Democrats could be more competitive in the newly created districts as Republican strength in some current districts is diluted. Mr. Massey said in the chamber on Tuesday that changing the maps was extremely risky and could allow Democrats to pick up the seat. Very candidly, you're going to motivate black turnout, and there will be repercussions for that, including on local races, he said in that speech. Mr. Massey and Mr. Hayat did agree that the redistricting debates were about to get messier in Columbia, the capital. It'll be like nothing we've ever seen, Mr. Hayat said. It'll be long. It'll be tedious. At times, hopefully, it'll be respectful. He laughed when asked what he made of the governor's change of heart on redistricting, adding, "I never thought it was out of the realm of possibility." Mr. Massey said Mr. McMaster had argued in a private meeting that calling the legislature back didn't mean he was telling them what to do. "My position on this is if you're calling us back, you're telling everybody what you want us to do," Mr. Massey said. Mr. Massey described their redistricting dilemma as a box within a box, a maze, something he didn't know how to escape. Sooner or later, he added, they would have to vote on new maps. The debate over redistricting comes in the the debate over redistricting comes in the waning weeks of a crowded Republican primary battle for governor. All of the leading candidates have expressed their support for redistricting to increase Republicans' chances of retaining control of Congress. Some of the candidates, including Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette and Alan Wilson, the state attorney general, have showed up to committee hearings, urging lawmakers to move ahead. Mr. Trump has not yet endorsed anyone in the governor's race. Okay, moving on to the next article. Political organizer wins Democratic primary in key Nebraska House race. Denise Powell prevailed in a close primary race for an Omaha-based seat, currently held by a retiring Republican, that could help determine control of the House. Denise Powell, a political organizer, won the Democratic primary election in a key Nebraska House district, according to the Associated Press. She will face Brinker Harding, a Republican city councilman, in the general election, a pivotal contest in a battleground district that comes as Democrats try to recapture control of Congress this fall. Representative Don Bacon, the Republican incumbent in the district and a frequent critic of President Trump, chose not to run for re-election, setting up a high-profile clash for an opening seat in Omaha. Ms. Powell narrowly triumphed in a competitive Democratic primary that centered on an unusual argument that electing her chief rival, State Senator John Kavanaugh, could make it easier for the Republicans to win the White House in 2028. The argument stemmed from the way Nebraska allocates its electoral votes in presidential elections. Most states follow a winner-take-all approach, but Nebraska gives just 2 of its votes to the statewide winner, then gives 1 to the winner of each of its 3 congressional districts. In recent elections, the Omaha area district has typically gone blue in presidential contests and awarded its electoral vote accordingly, even as the 2 other Nebraska congressional districts typically went to the Republican candidate. That could make a difference in a close presidential contest. State Republicans have tried to repeal the so-called blue dot system, named for the blue liberal dot Omaha represents in a sea of Republican red. But Democrats in the state legislature have been able to block that effort. Mr. Kavanaugh's opponents argue that if he won the House primary and left the state Senate, it would mean one fewer vote to keep the blue dot. Mr. Kavanaugh argued that the system was safe and that Democrats were likely to be elected in other state Senate seats to compensate for his departure. The argument may have been enough to help Ms. Powell to victory. A super PAC with ties to Republicans also spent against Mr. Kavanaugh. Okay, moving on to the next article. General Kane's silence on Iran war leaves questions about military strategy. The president's top military advisor is walking a tightrope as he leads the military through a divisive and unpopular war. In nearly 14 hours of congressional testimony in recent weeks, General Dan Kane was repeatedly asked versions of the same two questions. How had the world's most powerful military allowed the Iranians to cut off the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz? And what could it do to get ships moving again? The answers General Kane delivered highlighted the tightrope he walks. As the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he is obligated to stay out of the political fray inflamed by the war in Iran. But he works for a president who demands absolute loyalty. In public, General Kane has defined the military's mission in narrow terms, an approach he took on Tuesday as frustrated Democrat and Republican lawmakers pressed him on Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to explain their plans to open the strait and end the war. Our military objectives have been clear the whole time, General Kane said. He talked about targeting Iran's ballistic missile systems, destroying its Navy and defense industrial base, and stopping Iranian forces from threatening the U.S. military and allies in the region. He repeatedly praised the dedication of U.S. troops over the course of the war. But he avoided any discussions of the broader U.S. military strategy. Did you anticipate the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the resulting impact on oil supplies for many countries, including here in the United States? Asked Senator Susan Collins, a Republican of Maine. We have an incredible staff over at the Pentagon, he said, and we always look at the range of military branches and sequels. I won't comment on any particular one because that gets to whatever advice I may or may not give to the president. Senator Jack Reed, Democrat of Rhode Island, tried again a few minutes later. Have you been surprised by the resistance of the Iranians? He asked. I always assume an enemy is going to resist, General Kane said. He declined to say whether he had conveyed those assumptions to President Trump before he launched the war. General Kane has been similarly evasive on the damage to the Iranians' military's missile and drone capabilities, a key indicator of the effectiveness of the U.S. bombing campaign and the progress of the war. All our battle damage assessment matters are classified, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment, he said on Tuesday. He elided reports that U.S. forces had burned through stockpiles of costly weapons, such as long-range stealth cruise missiles built for a war with China. Asked about such shortfalls on Tuesday, General Kane responded, "We have sufficient munitions for what we're tasked to do right now." General Kane's most telling public exchange came 2 weeks earlier when Senator Gary Peters, Democrat of Michigan, asked him to define the center of gravity in the war of Iran. The term is rooted in U.S. military doctrine and the Prussian military theorist Karl von Clausewitz, who defined it as the enemy's primary source of strength, the hub of all power and movement which everything depends. In the 1991 Persian Gulf War, as the United States sought to expel Iraqi forces from Kuwait, General Colin Powell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, defined the center of gravity as Iraq's elite Republican Guard troops. 20 years later, as the Obama administration was struggling to carry out a new strategy in Afghanistan, Admiral Mike Mullen, also the chairman, defined it as building an Afghan government that had the support of its citizens. What's really critical is that we put the Afghan people in the center and that they become the center of gravity, he said. General Kane declined to define for Mr. Peters the center of gravity in the Iran war, saying that the decision should be made by U.S. political leaders. Some of his resistance is a product of Mr. Trump, who has sought to preserve his negotiating flexibility by not locking his administration into building war aims beyond ensuring that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. Mr. Trump's mercurial nature, his willingness to change his mind on almost a daily basis, also puts military leaders in a difficult spot. To speak publicly about war strategy risks being countermanded by the commander-in-chief. Mr. Peters, a Navy veteran, offered his own diagnosis. The center of gravity, he said, was the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20% of the world's oil supply flows. We're not going to bring this war to an end until we seize control of the straits in a way that opens them back up, he said. In White House Situation Room meetings with the president in the lead up to the war, General Kane was more forthcoming, though still cautious, U.S. officials have said. He raised the prospect that an extended war with Iran would drastically deplete stockpiles of some critical American weapons, U.S. officials said. And he flagged the risk of Iran blocking the strait. But he also has said that as the top military advisor to the president, it is his job to present options to Mr. Trump, not take a firm stand or make policy. Some military analysts praised General Kane's approach. On the whole, I think he has been remarkably discreet, and appropriately so, said Elliot Cohen, a historian and senior State Department official during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's up to his political bosses to decide how they want to talk about it. Others said he was ceding too much ground. Concepts like the enemy's center of gravity are normally understood as a military determination, not a presidential prerogative, said Stephen Biddle, a professor of international affairs at Columbia University and a frequent advisor to the Pentagon. One risk of General Kane's relative silence is the signal it sends to other officers, said Heidi Urban, a retired Army colonel and the associate director of the Security Studies program at Georgetown University. When military leaders only talk about tactics, it reinforces this fallacy within the ranks that they don't need to worry about strategy, that other people will take care of that stuff, Ms. Urban said. In the hearings on Tuesday, Republican and Democratic lawmakers complained about the economic pressure the war was putting on Americans. Nothing matters more to our constituents than doing something about these spiraling gas prices, which are bankrupting families and farmers all across the country, said Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut. The senators pressed General Kane to explain how Iran, despite the damage it had sustained and its massive firepower disadvantage, was still able to maintain control of the strait and impose such pain on the global economy. It's a complex situation, General Kane replied. Some of this is on commercial traffickers. It was an answer that seemed to satisfy no one. Senator John Hoeven, Republican of North Dakota, pushed General Kane and Mr. Hegseth to outline a military plan that could lead to a reopening of the strait. That relieves pressure on us and our allies, Mr. Hoeven said, and that's what I'm asking for. You are listening to a reading of articles and features on the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. Is Trump tuned out to Americans' financial needs? Our remark suggests yes. Asked if he was motivated by Americans' financial woes to make a deal to end the war with Iran, he responded, "Not even a little bit." President Trump has never been a fuzzy, feel your pain kind of politician. That came through in an especially striking way yesterday, when he answered a question about whether he was motivated by the financial situation of Americans to make a deal to end the war with Iran. "Not even a little bit," he replied, as my colleague Erica Green reported. "I don't think about Americans' financial situation," Trump added. "I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all." It was a response that flouted fundamental rules of American politics, that voters are motivated above all by economic concerns, that they want to support politicians who care about people like me. And it was a risky one, given Trump's dire political standing. His disapproval rating is consistently hovering around 60% or worse. A new CNN poll found that 77% of Americans, including majority of Republicans, thought his policies had increased the cost of living in their own community. Inflation rose a startling 3.8% in April, the fastest rate since May of 2023, sending a flashing warning about how the war in the Middle East is raising prices for Americans. Republican pushback to the conflict is growing in Congress. And Trump has not exactly given the impression that he is single-mindedly focused on bringing down the cost of living. He spent one recent night unleashing a barrage of truth social posts about various grievances and topics, including conspiracy theories about Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. President Trump was reelected for 4 reasons. Whit Aries, a veteran Republican pollster, told me: to improve the economy, to bring down inflation, to control illegal immigration, and to get away from woke culture. Anything that works against any of those 4 goals is not helpful. Republicans have had some good news, however, on the redistricting front. 2 favorable court rulings for them have spurred a rapid escalation of Republican-led redrawing of maps across the South. Trump, for his part, has arrived in Beijing for a 2-day summit with the Chinese leader, and his team argues that he can focus on problems both abroad and at home. President Trump's ultimate responsibility is the safety and security of Americans, which is why the president will never allow the world's #1 state sponsor of terror to have a nuclear weapon, Olivia Wales, a White House spokeswoman, said in a statement. She added, the administration is focused on implementing the proven Trump agenda of tax cuts, deregulation, and energy abundance to keep America on a solid economic trajectory. Several primaries unfolding this month will test his influence and the popularity of his policies in his party. And of course, November is a long time from now. The longer term forces are obviously not promising. With increasing inflation and declining job approval on the part of the president, Aries said, There are some short-term forces, particularly the mid-decade redistricting, which might work in the favor of the House side. So we'll see which one dominates. But he added, there's no question that there is a strong relationship between the president's job approval and his party's performance in the House. Okay, next article. This is from the opinion section, an article written by Zain Habu. My son never turned 7 because of choices in Washington. Others won't either. My son, Rakan, was 5 years old when I first said the word cancer to a doctor. They looked at me the way doctors sometimes look at mothers, as if I were afraid of my shadow. It was allergies, they said. The ordinary explanation for an ordinary child, but I knew his energy was off. I knew my boy. We were in Jordan for the summer when my husband noticed that Rakan's spleen was protruding. My childhood pediatrician told us not to worry, to enjoy the few days on the beach, then get a CT scan. There was a cloud over the whole trip that none of us could name. We already knew, in the way parents know things their minds won't let them say out loud. Most CT scans take less than 5 minutes. Rakan's took nearly an hour. I remember breaking down in that room. I remember a nurse holding me while I sobbed, telling me it would be okay. I remember the word mass being repeated and not knowing what it meant, and yet knowing it was the end of everything. Rakan fought his cancer, a rare form of pediatric kidney cancer known as diffused anaplastic Wilms tumor, with a ferocity that lives in me to this day. Multiple surgeries, multiple rounds of chemotherapy and radiation. But every time he took one step forward, the universe pushed us back 2 steps. He died almost exactly 1 year after his diagnosis at age 6 on the 4th floor of Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C., surrounded by the doctors and nurses who had become our family. Afterward, I remember asking the doctor what we could have done differently. He said, we did everything we could. Only more research would get us to a cure for the tumor that killed my son. In the 10 years since, I have raised money for more cancer research and told Rakan's story to anyone who would listen. Here's what I need you to understand about pediatric cancer research. It is already the orphan of the oncology world. The percentage of federal cancer research funds that goes towards childhood cancer numbers in the single digits. Treatment protocols for some pediatric cancers haven't changed in decades. The popular cancers, the ones with celebrity galas and pink ribbons and adult celebrity patients, get money and attention. The ones that take children languish. And yet, around 15,000 children are diagnosed with cancer in this country every single year. But what was already bad is now getting worse. That path to curing pediatric cancer is closing, not because we have run out of ideas or new treatments to buy or to try, but because the Trump administration made a choice to cut funding for pediatric cancer research and undermine the institutions that once made America the envy of the world when it came to health innovation. In March, funding expired for the Pediatric Brain Tumor Consortium, a 26-year-old network that provides children access to experimental treatments. The following month, President Trump released his 2027 budget, which proposed cutting funding for the National Institutes of Health by 12%. Already under this administration, we've seen a hollowing of support for research and science. Last year, hundreds of National Institutes of Health research grants were canceled or suspended, and the agency continues to fund research at a much slower pace than usual. A recent analysis found that as of late March, the National Cancer Institute had embarked less than a third of what it would have for new grant funding by the point in a typical year under the Biden administration. Researchers who would have been guaranteed funding in any normal year are being told there is no money. I want to be precise about this because the administration will be precise in its denials. There is no single executive order that says we are cutting childhood cancer research. What there is instead is death by 1,000 cuts, each one individually deniable, collectively lethal. A proposed cap on indirect costs for research that would make clinical trials impossible to run, mass layoffs and resignations at the NIH that have gutted institutional knowledge, grant freezes, a leadership vacuum at the very agencies charged with saving children's lives. Children will die from this, not metaphorically, not eventually. Children are sick right now, whose parents are scanning clinical trials the way I once scanned them. Will find those trials closed. Parents will be told there is no study for their child's particular cancer. They will stand on a hospital floor somewhere and ask a doctor what else could have been done. Rakan would have been 16 last month. He had big, beautiful eyes and a wicked sense of humor, and he was perfect, the way 5-year-olds are perfect. I will never know what kind of young man he could have grown up to be. We should strive to spare other parents this pain, and we can. It's not too late to restore funding to cancer research and save thousands of children's lives. What else is the point of all this wealth and technology that our country has amassed, if not to put it to work saving the lives of little boys like Rakan? All right, moving on. Next article. Mid-sized cities held steady as U.S. population growth declined. New census estimates show that the nation's largest cities saw the sharpest slowdowns in population growth over the past year, amid declines in immigration and plunging birth rates. Mid-sized U.S. cities held steady in population over the past year, even as the national population grew at one of the slowest rates in history, according to new numbers released on Thursday by the Census Bureau. Across the country, the growth of large cities was outpaced by the surrounding mid-sized cities, defined as municipalities with populations ranging from about 25,000 to 70,000. Fort Mill, South Carolina, was the fastest growing city, increasing its population by 6.8% to 38,673. Its growth outpaced that of nearby Charlotte, North Carolina, the nation's 14th largest city. The new census estimates capture changes in the population from July 1st, 2024 through July 1st, 2025, a period when immigration declined under the tighter border policies imposed towards the end of the Biden administration and the aggressive enforcement under the Trump administration. The figures also reflected the continuing effects of declining birth rates as the country's fertility rate fell to a record low. The nation's population increased by about 1.8 million over the past year, hitting almost 342 million on July 1st. That represents a roughly 0.5% growth rate, the lowest since 2021, when the COVID-19 pandemic caused an increase in deaths and a slowdown in migration. According to the new census estimates, drop-offs in average growth were steepest in the largest cities, especially those in the Northeast. Among the largest cities, average growth rates fell by at least half compared with a year earlier. The growth slowdown in bigger cities has a lot to do with the recent downturn in immigration, as immigrants tend to land in these cities, said William Fry, a demographer at the Brookings Institute. He added that further declines could occur as immigration is curtailed. Net immigration added almost 1.3 million people to the U.S. population over the period measured, considerably lower than the roughly 2.7 million added in the prior year. If current trends continue, net immigration will fall to about 321,000 for the year ending on June 30th, according to an earlier Census Bureau news release. The new census estimates found that some major hubs even had small population declines. Matt Erickson, a statistician at the Bureau's Population Division, said in a news release. In contrast, he added, mid-sized cities found a Goldilocks zone where domestic and international immigration paired with new housing helped prevent the sluggish growth seen in small towns and larger metropolitan areas. For small towns, defined as places with a population of 5,000 or less, those in the Northeast experienced small population declines. Those in the Midwest stayed the same, while those in the South and West saw sluggish growth. New York City, the nation's most populous city, lost 12,196 people, the greatest numeric decline in the country, but a small percentage of its population. Some incorporated areas on the outskirts of the city, led by Port Chester, New York, were among the fastest growing. Overall, the fastest growing cities, among those with populations over 20,000, were concentrated in Texas. 4 of the cities were clustered in the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex, and the 5th was outside Houston. Austin, Texas, hit 1 million residents, and Raleigh, North Carolina, crossed 500,000 people. Although U.S. population growth slowed, housing growth did not. The total number of housing units reached 148.3 million in 2025, an increase of about 1% from the prior year, but still behind what housing experts say is needed to meet the supply shortage. California added the most housing units, followed by Texas and Florida. So you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times dated May 14th. You've been listening to Mark Grier. Thank you so much for listening today.